Okay, so we are going to go over kind of the second essay here. Let me actually find it. So we're going to compare two characters from Mona Lisa Smile. So we're going to compare and contrast Joan Brandwin versus Betty Warren. Joan Brandwin and Betty Warren are two of the most complex characters in Mona Lisa Smile, representing different aspects of feminism, tradition, and personal choice. While both are intelligent, privileged young women attending Wellesley College, their journeys take them in opposite directions, revealing the tensions between societal expectations and personal agency. So let's talk about their upbringing and initial world views. Ew. Joan Brandwin, the open minded intellectual. Joan is academically gifted and ambitious, gaining acceptance into Yale Law School, which was a rare achievement for women in the 1950s. She's open to new ideas, but still influenced by traditional gender roles, making her one of the most nuanced characters in the film. Unlike Betty, Joan is more moderate in her beliefs. She does not completely reject traditional roles, but also does not blindly accept them. Betty Warren, the conservative idealist. Betty comes from a privileged upper class background where traditional gender roles are deeply ingrained. She is raised to believe that marriage is the ultimate goal for a woman and that feminist ideas are dangerous. Initially, she embodies the perfect 1950s housewife mentality, seeing college not as a place for intellectual growth, but as a finishing school before marriage. Betty is outspoken, critical of women who challenge societal expectations, including Joan and Catherine Watson. And so let's actually unpack the differences, um, their views on feminism and gender roles. Joan takes the middle ground. She doesn't outright reject feminism, but struggles with what it means for her personally. She sees value in education and career opportunities, but also romanticizes traditional roles, believing that a woman can be both a wife and an intellectual. When she gets accepted into Yale Law School, she's thrilled, but ultimately chooses marriage over a legal career, a decision she consciously makes rather than being pressured into. She asserts that feminism should be about having the freedom to choose, whether that means being a lawyer or a homemaker. Her belief is that both paths can be equally valid as long as the decision is personal and not forced by societal pressure. And then there's Betty, who's the traditionalist turned rebel. Betty starts as the opposite of Joan, fully embracing traditional gender norms and seeing career oriented women as a threat to family values. She marries young, fully expecting to have a perfect life as a wife, supporting her husband and social status. She actively fights against feminist ideas, writing editorials criticizing Catherine Watson and dismissing career aspirations as meaningless. However, her reality does not match her expectations. Her husband is unfaithful, and she realizes that the life she was raised to want is empty and unfulfilling. By the end of the film, she does what was once unthinkable. She files for a divorce and leaves her husband, rejecting the very ideals she once defended. Let's talk about their transformations and endings. Joan's transformation is like choosing tradition by choice. Joan's arc is subtler than Betty's. She does not change her beliefs as much as she reaffirms them, choosing to marry and have a family over a legal career. The key takeaway from Joan's story is that feminism is about choice, and she believes that Catherine Watson is too narrow minded in assuming that success must come from a career. Unlike Betty, Joan enters marriage with full awareness of her options, which makes her decision feminist in its own right. Betty's transformation, rejecting tradition after disillusionment. Betty's change is more dramatic. she begins the film believing marriage is everything, only to find out that her marriage is a sham. Her mother pressures her to stay, reinforcing the idea that appearances matter more than happiness. By the end, she does what few women of her social class would dare. She leaves her husband and redefines her future on her own terms. Her final scene, where she tells her mother she's leaving, is a complete rejection of her upbringing and a powerful feminist moment. But there are some similarities between Joan and Betty. Both are intelligent, privileged women from upper class backgrounds benefiting from an elite education. Both initially accept traditional gender roles, though Joan is more open to questioning them. Both struggle with societal expectations, but they handle them in different ways. Both make life altering choices that define their feminism. Joan chooses marriages on her own terms, while Betty rejects marriage altogether. There are key differences between Betty and Joan. What their journeys represent in feminism. Well, let's actually go back to those differences for a second. Hold on. So, in their initial beliefs, Joan is open to feminism but values tradition, while Betty strictly adheres to traditional gender roles. In their approach to feminism, Joan believes feminism means having the freedom to choose, while Betty sees feminism as a threat to societal stability at first. And then, in terms of career versus marriage, Joan chooses marriage over Yale law but sees it as her own decision, while Betty believes marriage is the only valid path but then later rejects that. In terms of their transformation, Joan confirms her belief that women should have options, while Betty completely reverses her stance, rejecting the ideals she once upheld. By the end of the film, Joan is happily married and content with her choice, and Betty divorces, leaves her old life behind, and embraces independence. The biggest lesson for Joan is that feminism isn't about forcing a career, but about allowing women to define their own paths, while Betty learns that traditional gender roles can be oppressive and that true happiness comes from personal fulfillment. So that's kind of interesting, right, to compare and contrast. And let's talk about what their journeys represent in terms of feminism. Joan's story represents early debates within feminism about choice. Not all women want a career, and forcing a singular idea of success can be just as restrictive as traditional gender norms. Um, she's a reminder that feminism is about the right to choose, whether that choice aligns with traditional values or not. Betty's story represents the dangers of blind conformity. She believed in the fairy tale of marriage, but learned the hard way that it does not guarantee happiness. Her arc is more radical as she goes from being feminism's biggest critic to its unexpected champion. So, in conclusion, there are two sides of feminism. Joan and Betty represent two contrasting yet equally important feminist narratives. Joan shows that feminism is about agency. Choosing marriage over a career is not anti feminist if it's a decision made freely, while Betty shows the consequences of internalized gender norms. Her story highlights the struggle women faced when they conformed to societal expectations without questioning them. Together, they offer a nuanced exploration of what it means to be a woman in a world where the definition of success is constantly evolving. So, if you haven't watched my other two videos on Mona Lisa Smile or watched the movie Mona Lisa Smile, this is a continuation of that conversation. But I think it's kind of one of the only films, modern day films, that unpacks modern day feminism, because a lot of women are going to college, but also trying to figure out if that means that they should actually have a family and children, especially given this current state of men, right? So you'd have to like compare and contrast all of those things at the same time to come to like a full decision. So I don't know. I just think that's interesting and I don't hear enough people talking about it. So yeah, let's continue this conversation. Hello, my name is Olivia. Welcome to my channel. I like to sit around at coffee shops or at the beach and talk shit. I talk about women's issues, feminism, relationships, but mostly being a black woman in America and how to survive that. Politically, I'm moderate, even though that seems hard for people to believe. I'm very conservative on issues like immigration, very liberal on other issues like feminism and abortion. Thanks for being here.